Know where we're going yet? Miranda asked after a few moments passed. This caught James off guard, as he pulled his eyes off the road to stare at Miranda for a moment. What she said hadn't registered with him yet. She sat unbuckled and sideways on the bench seat, facing directly at James. She simply smiled at him as he looked her up and down in confusion. "Shouldn't you be buckled right now?" James asked her with a raise of his eyebrow. "Shouldn't you be watching the road?" She punted back, her deep blue eyes wide in mock shock of him not looking forward. I am, he replied as his head snapped back to front. The road continued straight for a while, cutting cleanly between tall, snow-covered evergreen trees against a flat gray skyline. "Do you just get, like, a feeling of where to go?" She prodded again with her questions. "I'm just driving the first road out of the driveway. So far, I don't feel bad about it," James answered weakly. He didn't sound confident about where he's going at all, and Miranda could tell. "Well, maybe it takes a bit to kick in," she reassured him placidly. "Maybe you'll only know when it's time to turn. Hopefully with a bit of warning, of course." "I don't know what's supposed to happen, honestly," James confessed. "I don't remember anything about what to do." He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel he was clutching tightly. "I'm just driving, waiting for something to happen. I don't even know if I'm going the right way or not." "You're going the right way," Miranda answered him. James looked at her wordlessly as she shot him a kind smile before looking out the back window. "How do you know and I don't?" James demanded suddenly. "'Cause we're supposed to be heading towards the mountains," she told him as she pulled her coat over her legs like a blanket. "The closer we get, the more will be revealed." "How do you know?" James began, but was cut across immediately. "Your dad," she answered him calmly. "It was part of what he told me. I'm supposed to let you know stuff slowly so as not to overwhelm you." She looked back at him on this last part. "Damn." James shook his head shamefully. "I'm already overwhelmed." Miranda chuckled at this. "I've already failed," she added in mock disappointment before turning back to look behind them. James watched her cinnamon ponytail fall over her shoulder as she turned away. "So if I get lost, you already know where I'm supposed to go?" wondered James as he turned back to the frosted road stretching on ahead of him. "No, only you and your dad know specifically where to go. I just know the general heading to get you close to it," she explained. "Well, my dad's gone now, so..." A rock returned to James' stomach at the mention of his now dead father. He looked at his still bruised knuckles gripping the steering wheel as he thought about what Miranda still doesn't know about his death. "Luckily we have you, then." Miranda brought him back to the present. "Cool. I don't remember anything, though." James jumped on the chance to stop talking about his dad. "You will. Your memory has come back before. It'll come back again," she reassured him. "God, I hope so. 'Cause if it doesn't, I'm about to get you good and lost," explained James. He just surveyed the road ahead, completely missing the smile Miranda gave him. "Don't worry about me. I'm in it for the long haul," declares Miranda. She too surveys the road behind them. The road meandered through the frosted trees for many miles with very little change. Occasionally, they'd arrive at an intersection where James would focus as best he could on his surroundings. Sometimes he'd stare intently at the posted signs. Others, he'd try to spot any significant landmarks unique to the area, quietly waiting for a moment to see if anything would jump out at him, telling him the direction to go. A disembodied voice, a vision, a floating arrow from a video game, anything. When nothing came, Miranda would tell him that it's okay and it'll come to him eventually, before pointing out the proper direction on her map. When they weren't trying to feel their way along the route, Miranda thought it'd be a good memory jogger to quiz him on different songs he might know. Okay, I'll let that last one slide, because it was kind of niche anyways. But I swear, if you don't know this one, then I'm turning this truck around." Miranda scrolled through her MP3 player, looking for the next song to play through the truck's speakers. "You're not even driving," James exclaimed, gesturing to the steering wheel right in front of him. "I don't care. I'm going to do it," asserted Miranda as the next song began to play. It took just a moment before James smiles and nods. "Of course I know this one. This was a good one." James nodded his head to the beat. "How old were you when you first heard it?" Miranda quizzed. "I have no idea," shrugged James. "Young, probably." "How old do you think you were?" pushed Miranda. She raised her eyebrows at him with a mischievous smile. "You're enjoying the abuse, aren't you?" accused James. "Just answer the question." Miranda doubled down on getting an answer. "I don't know. Maybe, 13? He shrugged again. James was just enjoying the music and didn't care to explore why he enjoyed it. "Why do you think 13? She followed up. James looked at her again, making a point to study her face. Her blue eyes dilated tightly in the break of sun glowing throughout the truck. "It's a memory exercise, okay? Just play along for a bit," Miranda urged him on. James sighed and thought for a moment. Searching himself why he thought he was 13 was a tricky question to answer. I guess because I feel like I'm 13 when I hear it." He finally got the words out. "What does 13-year-old you feel like?" Miranda asked after a second. "Angsty, awkward. Kinda cool while listening to this jam, though," he thought out loud. "Young, I guess." He finished with another shrug. Miranda just kept smiling her knowing smile at him before answering. "You're correct," she congratulated him. "We're the same age, and we were 13 when this one came out." "Okay, I think I'm getting the game now." James nodded knowingly as he checked his mirrors. "Don't think of the game. Just think of the songs and how best to answer my questions," she instructed him. "All right, geez." James chuckled at her seriousness. "Next song," she announced as another song began playing. James listened for a moment. "I like this one. I kind of remember it," he said. "You do? Anywhere specific?" she asked. He thought for a moment as he just took in the song. Eventually, he shook his head no. "That's okay. How old were you?" she asked again. "This feels recent-ish. I was definitely out of my teens." "First year of university?" James wondered aloud to himself. "Why then?" came the tougher question. He had a better understanding of what she was expecting this time around, so he was better at giving an answer. "Hearing this one makes me feel like I'm cut loose, off the leash for the first time, free to make my own choices. Yet at the same time a bit nervous, like people are sizing me up." James looked at her to see if this was an acceptable answer. Her dark brows were furrowed in thought as her narrow eyes appraised him. Okay, she cryptically said. "It was first year. You're 2 in a row now." James pumped his fist in the air in a small celebration over his score. "Number 3 won't be easy," she informed as she scrolled to another song. This one was immediately different than the other two. A slower, more mellow song washed over James that all at once flooded him with sentimental feelings he couldn't quite describe. This one came sometime after the last one. Not by much, though. He started to explain, not waiting for her questions. "Very different," he chuckled. "Why?" she asked him seriously. James turned to see her watching him closely, hugging her legs and observing him intently, waiting expectantly for his answer. "'Cause it feels more personal. I don't know. Kinda got my heart racing, you know?" A lot of butterflies with this one. Like you're finally noticed by somebody you've been hoping to meet for a while now. Things click, and you're eager to see where they lead you. James stopped talking to just listen to the song. I'm probably way off on this one. That's not even the vibe of the song. He smirked at her, but she wasn't smirking back. She just watched him for a while, her face expressionless. How can you be way off? This is how you feel about it. She finally spoke up. Her tone was placid and serious as she said this. It was unbearably obvious that she wasn't telling him something. He at least could tell that this was no memory exercise, at least for him. The song came to an end and left both of them in the silence of the cab for a moment. The sun was now below the trees as the sky faded from a warm orange to a cooler purple. A few yawns later, and James was now rolling his shoulders tenderly. He had been sitting for a while and hadn't noticed how stiff and sore he'd become. The muscles all down his back started to feel like knots cinching up around his spine, painfully locking him in place. His neck was tight and stiff, making it difficult to turn and look around. Even stretching his leg out as much as he could led to a few painful pops. Miranda must have heard these as she sat up and checked her watch. I think it's time we eat and get some sleep, she declared. James didn't protest, as the temperature was starting to drop and he felt himself sinking under the heavy weight of exhaustion. He didn't want to fight it much longer. Guess we'll pull off somewhere, he said. In a few minutes, they found a rest stop. Pulling into a spot, they didn't see any other cars in the parking lot. Just frosty pavement and a small brown building with public restrooms at the edge of the lot. Beyond it was a small field of snow, with the trees beyond that. A single lamppost right in front of the restrooms was the only light left, as everything else faded into silhouette as night kept ascending. Not much of a dinner, but they're filling. Miranda held up 2 energy bars and gave them a crinkly wiggle, as if to entice James closer. I'll take whatever you've got, James accepted gratefully. You eat, I'll be right back. With a blast of frosty air wafting in their warm cabin, Miranda hopped out to have a quick stretch and walked to the restrooms. James ate in silence as he watched the tops of the trees disappear into the setting darkness, thinking about everything that happened to get him here now. From the safe house on a hot summer day to a pickup truck in a snowy rest stop. From his dad always backing him up and defending him in his condition, to him and a near-complete stranger left to their own devices. All within a single day, at least to James' perspective. Not to mention he's being pursued by people Miranda feels are a threat. His stomach felt heavy and clenched tighter than a fist over all of this. The energy bar tasted great after a whole day without food, yet he felt he had to force each bite down against the raging mix of stress, worry, and sadness foaming back up at him. He finished the bar right as Miranda pulled the door open, blasting the cabin with cold air again. Anything to drink tonight, monsieur? She asked as she pulled a gray metal water bottle out from the bag at her feet. Thanks, he forced out as he took a swig. That one's yours. I've got mine, she said while pulling out another matching water bottle. You doing okay? She asked, noticing the pained look on his face. Just stiff from driving all day, James shrugged off. Guess I'll take my turn, he added with a smile and a nod towards the restrooms. Okay, Miranda nodded while studying him curiously. Well, be safe. Also, the toilets are cold as ice, so watch out, she warned him as he climbed out. James just gave a laugh as he exited the truck. He couldn't think of anything to say, and needed more time to himself to get that bar to settle in his angry stomach. He wasn't sure if he was queasy just because of today's events. With the stiff joints and cramping muscles, this was something more. That medication Miranda gave him this morning was clearly starting to wear out, and with only 2 left, that didn't leave much time to get wherever he needed to go. The walk to the toilet actually helped ease the pain some, with the cold air icing his inflamed muscles. He could have walked faster, but being alone with his thoughts on this short walk helped loosen his fried nerves. As much as he stretched it out, the walk finally came to an end. Climbing back into the truck, he found the front bench covered by a shiny blue sleeping bag rolled out. A black sun visor blocked out the windshield, closing in the cab more and making it a cozier environment. "Here's a pillow for you." Miranda popped up from the back seat where she was already laying in a matching sleeping bag. "So when can I take the next dose?" James asked after gingerly settling down, trying his best to be relatively comfortable. "You starting to feel bad again?" asked Miranda. "Just a bit," James confessed. He was already starting to feel his ankles and knees begin to tighten up and ache as he waited for the sleeping bag to warm up. "I've got a timer set for your next dose in the morning," Miranda informed him. "But I'm afraid I can't give you anything earlier than that, or we could mess it up." "I'll be fine. Right now I'm more tired than anything else." James reassured her that he'll manage till the morning. "Hey," came a half whisper from the back seat after a few minutes of silence. "If you need anything, just ask and I can give you a hand. Okay?" "Yeah, of course," James replied quickly. "Thanks." Moments passed in silence before James heard heavier, slower breathing coming from over the seats. Regardless of his own exhaustion, the pain he was experiencing was just too much to allow him to drift off. Tight knots blossomed one by one in his back, stabbing him like he was laying in a bed of rocks. He cautiously shifted to his left side, which felt less sore than his back, and stared at the dim silhouette of the steering wheel. Despite having very little memories to think back on, his mind was restless, agitated even, that he couldn't recall anything except today and his first day at the safe house. Neither of these 2 days were comforting memories to lull him to sleep. Quite the opposite. James tried looking at his knuckles in the darkness, but couldn't really see any detail. To him, they still felt as stiff and swollen as they did when he first noticed them earlier that morning. His stomach hadn't seen much change either. James dropped his hands beside him and stared straight ahead. With nothing to think back on, he did his best to keep his mind blank and hope sleep would take him. The silence didn't last long, however, as a now familiar hum began to surge up and down his body. It resonated louder and louder in his head, as the truck itself felt like it was rocking side to side, like a boat on the water. For a moment, James felt like he couldn't bear it much longer and considered sitting up. As soon as he flexed his muscles to move, they cramped up sharply, catching his breath in his chest. Back and forth, the rocking grew more and more aggressive as James clamped his hands tightly to the side of his head, bracing himself as he was violently tipped head over heels again and again. Finally, the entire truck rolled over completely as James was suspended from his seat to stare down into the darkness. James hung there for a moment, feeling relieved that the rocking had finally stopped. It was then that he noticed the sounds of a woman softly crying nearby. For a second, James thought it was Miranda crying from the back seat. He was about to ask her if everything's okay, before realizing the crying is actually coming from right beside him. James tried moving, but couldn't. Not because of any pain. That was actually gone now. But because he was being held tightly in an embrace of someone physically larger than him. Someone he was in fact sitting on the lap of. The crying woman was holding a much younger James and pressing him tightly to her chest as she sobbed over him. "Mom?" His young voice called up to her softly. "What do you need, Jimmy?" she choked through her tears to say. James was able to pull away now to look up at his mother's soft features. Her almond brown eyes clouded heavily with fresh tears that spilled over and down her cheeks. She ran her fingers through her son's hair as she looked at him, waiting for him to speak. "You're squeezing me too tight," came that little voice again. Like before, it involuntarily came out of James's throat, without him even thinking of these words to say. It was even stranger this time to hear his voice sounding so high and childlike. He hadn't heard this voice in many years. I'm sorry, sweet boy. His mother let out a small chuckle as she pulled him into a gentler hug this time. I just can't seem to get enough of you right now. Hey, bud. His father's more youthful voice came up behind him. Your lunch is ready in the kitchen, he started as the thinner and blacker-haired version of his dad squatted down beside him. It's been a very busy day today, and since you've been such a great kid through it all, I got out a soda to go with your lunch. And there's some brownies on the counter when you're done. Oh, yeah! Little Jimmy exclaimed as he began prying himself away from his mom's covetous grip on him. Thanks, Dad, Jimmy called back over his shoulder. Come see me when you're done, his mother hastily called after him. Okay, shouted Jimmy as he entered the wood-paneled kitchen. He beelined for the center island and climbed onto one of the stools. Climbing was a dizzying experience as he hoisted himself onto his seat while upside down. It was a sensation he couldn't get used to. His lunch of a sandwich sat with potato chips on a vibrant red plate. A purple soda can sat pre-opened next to it on the white tile surface. And right across from him sat a yellow plate stacked with squares of delicious fudge brownies. Jimmy hungrily began stuffing his face with the sandwich, which tasted just as good as it looked. Happily chewing on a mouth-filling bite, Jimmy kicked his legs as he enjoyed his lunch. He couldn't remember the doctor's appointment he just came from, except the feeling of tension, fear, and then sadness as his mom began to cry. He was starting to put all of that behind him as he went in for another bite, this time with chips loaded into the sandwich for a satisfying crunch. Oh no, James, came his mother's voice from the other room. She no longer sounded sad, but instead angry and tense. I had a feeling you would. I knew you couldn't resist this. Tara, why wouldn't we take this opportunity? You want him to live just as much as I do. His dad's voice replied urgently. I do want him to live, but not like those you've been helping. I've seen it, James, shouted his mother. Jimmy's legs stopped kicking as he chewed a little slower on his crunchy, chip-filled sandwich. The building anxiety he was starting to feel made lunch far less enjoyable, as he couldn't help but listen in on his parents' argument. You've seen the works in progress, Tara, not the final thing. Her husband tried explaining calmly. I don't want him to be a work in progress, James. I don't want him in your lab for years while you change him into something else, Tara snapped back. What do you want then? To just make your peace and say goodbye? You're throwing away an opportunity to give him a full life, James rebutted her. You can't guarantee that to him any more than I can, Tara shouted through her angry tears. Jimmy was finished with his sandwich as he drank his soda surreptitiously. He didn't want to miss anything that his parents were yelling about. He didn't fully understand what it is they're yelling about, but he knows it has to do with him and his doctor's appointment they just came from. He shoved the last of his chips into his mouth as he heard his mom's footsteps coming down the hallway to the kitchen. I think I can, Tara, James called after her as he followed her into the kitchen. I've saved plenty of lives, people I don't even know personally, yet the one I'm not allowed to use what I've learned on is my own son? Not in front of Jimmy, Tara snapped. She now stood behind Jimmy as he sat at the counter, frozen like a deer in the woods and sitting right between his parents' argument. He no longer wanted the rest of his soda, or even the brownies sitting across from him. All three of them stood still for a long moment in the kitchen, nobody saying anything as his mom stared tearful daggers at his dad. Come on, Jimmy, Tara said as she scooped her boy up into her arms. For a second, it felt like he was falling into the ceiling as his mom lifted him from the stool. Oh, come on, James called to her back. I'll go. You stay and let him have his brownies. How about we get some ice cream? Tara offered this to Jimmy only, but spoke loud enough for James to hear as she walked away. Okay, Mama, agreed Jimmy quietly. It's not like he had any say in what was happening anyways. He just watched over his mom's shoulder as his dad slumped onto a stool at the kitchen island and pulled a brownie off the bright yellow plate in front of him. Jimmy squeezed his mom tightly as she suddenly fell forwards while holding him. He braced for impact with the ground, though it never rose to hit him. Instead, he passed through the floor as his mom and the very room around him dissolved into blackness.